Karos punched the console so hard his fist dented the metal, a loud clang echoing through the bridge of the warship. He couldn't believe the scans. It was impossible. There was no way the humans had assembled an army this massive. Ships, soldiers, weapons, all in numbers that dwarfed the Draconis invasion force. The Empire's entire plan was in jeopardy, and Karos knew if he didn't act fast, his entire species would be slaughtered. The grizzled war scout straightened up, his green scales gleaming under the harsh lights. The scar across his face twitched as he ground his teeth. The data didn't lie. For months, Draconis scouts had been secretly monitoring Earth, gathering intel for the coming invasion. All of their projections said the primitive humans would fall easily under the Empire's might, but this new intel changed everything. Karos couldn't understand how the humans had hidden these numbers from them. Vast armies of millions, legions of powerful war machines, weapons of unimaginable destructive potential. The humans were not just ready for an invasion, they were ready for a war, an extermination. The War Scout's claw hovered over the comms switch. High Command needed to see this immediately, but doubt chewed at him. Delivering this news would mean the invasion would be called off. He would be forever branded a coward. There was still a chance the Draconis could... Wham! The ship jolted, alarms blaring. "Sir, human stealth ship locked on." Karos swore, "So it begins." The human stealth ship slammed another volley into the Draconis warship. Sparks showered from consoles, and flames burst from shattered displays. The shields strained against the onslaught, but held fast. For now. Karos roared orders to return fire. His crew rushed to battle stations, claws flying over controls. Energy blasts lanced out at the human vessel, slamming into its shields, but they splashed away, barely making a dent. "Impossible," Karos hissed. The humans were decades ahead of Draconis tech. It made no sense. Dicom's alert flashed urgently, a transmission from High Command. Karos's claw hovered over the switch. What could he possibly tell them? That he'd failed before the invasion even began? That the mighty Draconis Empire was woefully outmatched? He'd be branded a traitor on the spot, executed for incompetence and cowardice, but if he stayed silent... Boom! A thunderous explosion rocked the ship, nearly knocking Karos off his feet. Alarms screamed and lights flickered. He pulled himself up, grabbing the command chair for support. "Hull breach on Deck 5, an officer yelled. "Intruders boarding the ship." Karos's eyes went wide. He brought up a visual feed. Hulking figures in sleek black armor poured through the breach, massive rifles at the ready. At their head strode a human in customized gear, barking orders. Captain Ethan Taylor. Karos drew his sidearm with a snarl. Around him, his crew grabbed weapons and braced for close combat. This wasn't how the war was supposed to begin. They'd planned to be the invaders, not the invaded. But one way or another, blood would be shed today. The first battle between human and Draconis was about to unfold, right here on Karos's bridge. The fate of his crew, his mission, and perhaps his entire species hung in the balance. Plasma bolts crisscrossed the bridge as Karos and his crew exchanged fire with the human boarders. The War Scout ducked behind the command chair, popping up to squeeze off shots at the advancing Marines. All around him, consoles exploded in showers of sparks and smoke filled the air. "Get some fire on that human heavy!" Karos roared, indicating a hulking Marine carrying a rotary blaster. Two Draconis soldiers swiveled to engage, but the human was too fast. Shots hammered their cover, forcing them back down. Karos couldn't believe what he was seeing. The humans moved like lightning, their exosuits giving them incredible speed and agility. They leaped over railings, took plasma bolts on their armor like they were nothing. It was taking entire magazines to drop just one of them. And their technology. Karos caught a glimpse of something impossible. As a plasma bolt struck one of the Marines, a shimmering bubble flared around them, absorbing the impact. The human shrugged it off like a gentle shove. "Grak's teeth," Karos breathed. "Portable shield generators. The crazies back in R&D told us that was decades away." The humans had cracked it. They had surpassed the Draconis Empire in ways Karos couldn't even fully comprehend. All their plans, all their projections, up in smoke. This wasn't just a mere setback, this was... Boom! The deck lurched under Karos's feet. Klaxons blared and more smoke belched from shattered consoles. "Engine room breached," an officer cried. "Main power failing. We're dead in the void." Karos felt his guts turn to ice. Ethan Taylor was headed here, he was sure of it. They'd gut the ship, tear out its secrets. The Draconis would be laid bare, all their weaknesses revealed. Unless... His claw hovered over the self-destruct panel. Once pressed, there'd be no going back, no chance to escape. But if it kept the ship out of human hands... With a trembling claw, Karos input his authorization code. Around him, the few remaining officers shouted in protest. Alarms shrieked and red lights flashed as the self-destruct countdown ticked down. Karos hauled himself up, shouting orders. "Escape pods now, go, go, go!" His crew rushed for the exit, plasma rifles clutched tightly. They charged down smoke-filled corridors, the ship shaking itself apart around them. Bulkheads buckled, cables snapped and sparked. The human borders were everywhere, black armored figures surging through the chaos. Plasma fire crisscrossed the halls as Karos led the way, shooting down 2 Marines who rounded a corner. His crew piled into the escape pod bay, covering each other. "Get those pods open," Karos roared. "We're leaving!" Suddenly, Ethan Taylor himself burst into the bay, rifle blazing. His Marines were right behind him, firing relentlessly. "Take them down, but I want prisoners," Ethan ordered. Karos whirled, aiming his rifle. But Ethan was faster. Enhanced by his exosuit, the human tackled Karos just as he reached his escape pod. They crashed to the deck, grappling savagely. Karos snarled, slamming his fist into Ethan's faceplate. The human absorbed the blow and hammered back, servos whining. His punches felt like meteorites. All around them, human and Draconis soldiers clashed in brutal hand-to-hand. Plasma knives flashed, rifle butts smashed into jaws. Karos caught glimpses of his crew being overwhelmed by the relentless human assault. He threw Ethan off and staggered up, reaching for his pod's hatch. Ethan lunged, grabbing Karos's leg. The human was strong, far stronger than any creature that size should be. Karos felt himself being dragged back. "Oh, no you don't," Ethan grunted, getting Karos in a headlock. The Draconis thrashed, but Ethan's exosuit-enhanced grip was unbreakable. 3 minutes to self-destruct, the ship's computer announced. Desperation flooded Karos. He couldn't break free. His crew was being subdued all around him, slammed into bulkheads and forced to their knees. It was over. Ethan dragged Karos toward the human boarding ship. The other Marines hauled a handful of dazed Draconis after them. The hatch slammed shut. Engines roared, and the ship blasted free of the Draconis warship. Karos, pinned to the deck by Ethan's armored bulk, could only watch through a viewport as his once mighty vessel receded behind them. The countdown hit 0. The warship vanished in a sun-bright explosion, a thunderous shockwave buffeting the human ship. Flaming wreckage spun away into the void. Karos went limp in Ethan's grip, the fight leaving him. His ship was gone, his crew captured or dead, and now he was a prisoner of the very species he'd come to conquer. The Draconis High Command would brand him a failure, a traitor. His name would be erased from the histories. But as the human ship accelerated away, carrying Karos to an unknown fate, a new thought flickered in his mind. He was still alive, and he now had a chance to uncover the secret of humanity's impossible might. The war had only just begun, and Karos would do whatever it took to ensure his species survived it. The human ship's brig was a far cry from the dark, dank cells Karos had expected. The room was well lit and clean, with a simple cot and a small table. A force field shimmered at the entrance, the only indication that this was a prison at all. Karos sat on the cot, his claws fidgeting. The other Draconis prisoners were in similar cells nearby, their low growls and hisses echoing through the block. The force field buzzed, and Ethan Taylor stepped through, flanked by 2 Marines. Karos tensed, ready for the interrogation to begin. But Ethan merely pulled up a chair and sat down, setting a data pad on the table. "Commander Karros, I'm Captain Ethan Taylor. Welcome aboard the UES Odyssey." Karros narrowed his eyes. "I won't tell you anything, human. You may as well kill me now." Ethan shook his head. "We're not going to torture you, Karros. That's not how we operate." He tapped the data pad. "I'm here to ensure you and your crew are treated well. You'll have access to medical care, proper food, and quarters. Let us know if you need anything." Karros blinked, taken aback. This was not what he'd expected. "Why?" "You may be our prisoners, but you're still people. We respect that." Ethan stood. "When you're ready to talk, let the guards know. In the meantime, rest up. You've been through a lot." With that he left, leaving a very confused Karros behind. Over the next several days, true to Ethan's word, the Draconis were treated not as prisoners, but as guests. Their wounds were tended to, they were given comfortable quarters and nourishing food. Karros even saw some of the human crew playing games and conversing with his soldiers. It was all very surreal. The camaraderie and bond these humans had, even with their supposed enemies, was unlike anything in Draconis culture. There it was every soldier for themselves, climbing the ranks through any means necessary. And the technology. By the stars, the technology. Every glimpse Karros got of the human ship left him more astonished. From the sleek efficiency of the fusion drive to the mind-bending complexity of the medical equipment, it was centuries beyond anything the Draconis had. How had they underestimated the humans so severely? Ethan visited regularly, not to interrogate but to talk. He spoke of Earth, of the wars and strife that had torn humanity apart, and how they'd finally united in the face of greater threats. "We're not so different, your people and mine," Ethan said one day. "We've both struggled, fought, bled to get where we are." Karros found himself starting to agree, starting to understand. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to these humans than the Draconis had assumed. Just as these thoughts were whirling through Karros's head, an alarm blared through the ship. He leapt to his feet as Ethan burst into the cell, face grim. "A Draconis fleet just dropped out of FTL on the edge of the system," he said without preamble. "They're headed straight for Earth. Hundreds of ships." Karros felt his guts clench. The invasion, it was happening. "Karros, please," Ethan said urgently. "We need your help. You know the Draconis, their ships, their tactics. Earth's defenses are good, but we've never fought an enemy like this before." He held out a hand. "Work with us. Help us defend our home. Prove that our peoples don't have to be enemies." Karros stared at the outstretched hand. Everything he'd been taught, all his training and indoctrination, screamed at him to refuse, to spit in this human's face and welcome the coming slaughter. But the part of him that had seen the truth of humanity, that had begun to question the Empire's propaganda and brutality, whispered that this was a chance to forge a new path, for himself and perhaps for his entire species. Slowly, hesitantly, Karros reached out and clasped Ethan's hand. "I'll help you," he growled, "but I can't turn against my own people. I won't fight them." Ethan nodded. "I understand. We just need information, anything you can give us to defend against the invasion." As he followed Ethan out of the brig, towards the bridge where the fate of two worlds would be decided, Karros felt the weight of his choice settling on his shoulders. He had turned his back on the Empire, on everything he'd ever known. But looking around at the human ship, at the determined faces of its crew as they prepared for battle, he couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, he'd finally found something truly worth fighting for. Karros clenched his fists, the weight of his decision hanging heavy. He looked Ethan in the eye, his voice low and steady. "I'll help you stop Zorgax. The Draconis cannot win this way." Ethan nodded grimly. "Tell us what you know." Karros brought up a hologram of the incoming Draconis fleet. "Zorgax commands from here the Maelstrom, his flagship. He's a master of deception. Feints, false retreats, hidden reserves. We have to outfox him." The human captain studied the map intently. What if we give him a target he can't refuse? Together they crafted a daring gambit. Decoy ships would lure the Draconis into the Ort asteroid field. Zorgax, sensing weakness, would pursue. Then the true human fleet would spring the trap, using the asteroids as cover to devastate the Draconis ships. But it wouldn't be enough. They had to cut the head off the snake. "We need to infiltrate the Maelstrom," Karos growled. "Disable its weapons and comms, blind and defang Zorgax." Ethan flashed a predatory grin. "I like the way you think." As the fleets moved into position and the decoy ships streaked toward the asteroids, a small insertion craft detached from the human flagship. Karos, Ethan, and a hand-picked team of human and Draconis volunteers were aboard, armed to the teeth. Karos flexed his claws inside the prototype human exosuit. It felt strange, alien, but powerful. The fusion of human and Draconis technology would be their edge. The insertion craft sliced through space, dodging and weaving. The Maelstrom loomed ahead, a behemoth bristling with guns and armor. "Hangar bays portside," Karos barked. "Patrol patterns will have a gap in 30 seconds. Ethan gunned the engines. The craft punched through the gap, skidding into the hangar amidst a hail of plasma fire. Karos was first out, his exo-enhanced speed and reflexes making him a blur. He cut down the hangar guards before they could even react. Alarms blared as the team surged into the corridors. Squads of Draconi soldiers poured from every junction, plasma rifles blazing. Karos and Ethan fought back to back, human guns and Draconis blades dealing death in equal measure. They blasted into the primary comms relay, a cavernous chamber pulsing with arrays and displays. Karos tore into the consoles, his claws a whirlwind. Systems blinked out one by one. The Maelstrom was going dark. Suddenly the doors exploded inward. Admiral Zorgax stormed in, his elite guard at his back. The grizzled Draconis warlord snarled when he saw Karos. "Traitor!" he roared. "You dishonor your clan, your species!" Karos raised his plasma blade. "I fight for our people's future, Zorgax. You only fight for yourself." The two Draconis commanders lunged at each other, blades springing to life. They clashed in a storm of sparks and shrieks, moving faster than the eye could follow. Around them, Ethan and the team battled the elite guard. Plasma bolts and ricochets filled the air, consoles detonated, and bodies hit the deck. Karos gritted his fangs as Zorgax pressed the assault, the Admiral's blade nicking his scales. Zorgax had taught Karos everything he knew about fighting, but not everything Zorgax knew. A quick feint, a whirling dodge, and Karos saw his opening. His blade slipped under Zorgax's guard and plunged into the Admiral's chest. Zorgax stared down in shock, then crumpled. Karos stood over his former mentor, breathing hard. Ethan limped up beside him, clutching a wounded arm. Around them, the command center lay in ruins. "It's done," Karos said hoarsely. "The Maelstrom is crippled." Ethan nodded wearily. "Now we just have to hope the fleet can—" A brilliant flash lit the viewports. Karos and Ethan watched in awe as the Draconis fleet, caught in the asteroid ambush, was engulfed in a storm of destruction. Ships shattered and broke apart, overwhelmed by the human onslaught. It was a slaughter, a rout. The Draconis had never faced a foe like this, never imagined they could lose so utterly. Karos felt a strange mix of emotions as he watched his people's ships burn. Relief, yes, but also sorrow. Regret. So much death, so much destruction. All because the Draconis couldn't see past their own arrogance and aggression. There had to be a better way. And as Karos met Ethan's gaze, he knew they would find it. Together, humans and Draconis, they would forge a new path. A path of coexistence, not conquest. The battle was over. But the real struggle, the struggle for understanding and peace, was only beginning. In the heart of the ruined Maelstrom, Zorgax lowered his blade. His eyes locked with Karos, a silent plea for understanding passing between them. "Karos, listen to me," Zorgax growled. "The Draconis, we've been deceived." Karos tensed, claws tightening on his own blade. "What are you talking about?" "The Kaltox. They've been manipulating us, using us as pawns in their own conquest." Zorgax's voice was heavy with regret. "I've seen the evidence. They orchestrated this whole war. Karos reeled back as if struck. His mind raced, pieces clicking into place. The Karltox. The name sent a chill down his spine. An ancient race, whispered of only in the darkest corners of the galaxy. That's impossible, Karos stammered. But even as he said it, he knew it was true. It explained so much, the sudden aggression of the Empire, the strange new technologies, the relentless push for war. Zorgax shook his head. I wish it were, but I have proof, transmissions, artifacts, records of their involvement. They've been pulling the strings all along. Karos lowered his blade, the fight draining out of him. Then everything we've done, it was all for nothing? Not for nothing, Zorgax said firmly. We can still make this right, but we need allies. His gaze shifted to Ethan, who had been watching the exchange warily. The human captain stepped forward, lowering his rifle. If what you're saying is true, Ethan said slowly, then we have a common enemy and a common goal. Aharos looked to Zorgax, then back to Ethan. 1,000 thoughts swirled through his head. Loyalty, duty, honor. But above all, the truth. The need to protect his people, to forge a better future. Ethan is right, Karos said at last. We have to stand together. The Karltox are the real threat. Zorgax nodded grimly. Then let us waste no more time. We must take this evidence to your leaders, Ethan. Forge an alliance while we still can. As the strange group, human, draconis, rebel, and loyalist, made their way off the battered maelstrom, Karos felt a sense of purpose settling over him. The path ahead would be dangerous, perhaps even impossible. But for the first time in a long time, it also felt right. The alliance was forged in the fires of necessity, human and draconis, putting aside centuries of mistrust and hostility. The evidence Zorgax provided was damning, painting a picture of a galaxy-spanning conspiracy that threatened them all. In hastily assembled war rooms and command centers, a desperate plan took shape. The Karltox fleet was bearing down on Earth, an armada of nightmarish ships and eldritch weapons. They had to be stopped at any cost. Ethan and Karos, once bitter enemies, now stood shoulder to shoulder as they pored over star maps and battle plans. They had fought each other, bled on the same decks, seen the truth in each other's eyes. In that crucible, an unbreakable bond had been forged. The Karltox rely on quantum entanglement to coordinate their fleet, Ethan said, pointing at a glowing schematic. If we can disrupt that network, even for a few minutes, it could give us the opening we need. Karos nodded, his mind racing. A coordinated strike. Human and draconis ships hitting multiple targets at once, overwhelm their defenses, sow chaos in their ranks. Exactly. Ethan's face was grim but determined. It's a gamble, but it's the only chance we have. As the combined fleet assembled, a sense of tense anticipation hung in the air. Human and draconis crews worked side by side, loading weapons, running diagnostics, preparing for the fight of their lives. Ethan and Karos stood on the bridge of the flagship, watching the Karltox armada grow larger on the viewscreens. Karos could feel the weight of history on his shoulders, the fate of two species resting in their hands. No matter what happens, Ethan said quietly, it's been an honor, Karos. The draconis commander clasped Ethan's shoulder, feeling the strength and resolve in the human's frame. The honor is mine, Ethan. Today we fight as one. As the fleets closed the distance, weapons primed and ready, Karos felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. This was it, the moment of truth, the crucible in which the future would be forged. With a roar of engines and a blaze of weapons fire, the battle was joined. The Allied ships sliced into the Karltox formation, lances of energy and showers of missiles ripping into the eldritch hulls. The Karltox responded in kind, their weapons tearing ships apart, turning space into a maelstrom of fire and debris. At the heart of the chaos, Ethan and Karos led a strike team toward the Karltox flagship. They danced through the battle, weaving past enemy fire, blasting apart any foe that stood in their way. The flagship loomed ahead, a monstrous construct of twisted metal and pulsing energy. With a bone-jarring impact, Their craft slammed into the flagship's hull. Cutting torches flared, and then they were in, storming down the labyrinthine corridors of the alien ship. Strange runes pulsed on the walls, the air thick with the stench of ozone and rot. Deeper and deeper they pushed, fighting past hordes of Kaltok's warriors, each more nightmarish than the last. Ethan and Karos were a whirlwind of blades and blaster fire, their movements perfectly synchronized, forged in the heat of battle. At last they burst into the heart of the ship, a cavernous chamber pulsing with eldritch energy. And there, waiting for them, was the Kaltok's leader. It was a being of pure nightmare, a towering monstrosity of chitinous armor and writhing tentacles. Its eyes blazed with malevolent intelligence, and the very air seemed to shudder with the force of its psionic power. "Foolish primitives," it hissed, its voice echoing inside their skulls. "You cannot hope to stand against the might of the Kaltoks. We are the inheritors of this galaxy, the true masters of the cosmos." Ethan and Karos exchanged a glance, a silent agreement passing between them. They had come too far, sacrificed too much to be stopped now. As one they charged, weapons blazing, war cries tearing from their throats. The Kaltok's leader roared in fury, lashing out with blasts of psionic energy that shattered bones and crushed organs. But Ethan and Karos would not be denied. They fought with the strength of their convictions, with the fury of two species united against a common foe. Blade and blaster, claw and fist, they unleashed everything they had against the monstrous being. The battle was fierce and bloody, the chamber shaking with the force of their struggle. Ethan and Karos took wounds that would have felled lesser beings, their armor cracked and scorched, their bodies pushed to the very limits of endurance. But in the end, it was the Kaltok's leader that fell, its monstrous form slumping to the deck, ichor pooling around its shattered carapace. Ethan and Karos stood over it, battered and bloody, but victorious. Yet even as they caught their breath, the ship shuddered around them. Alarms blared and lights flickered, the Kaltok's flagship coming apart at the seams. The quantum network had been disrupted, the Kaltok's fleet thrown into disarray. But the flagship was a different matter. Its psionic core, now uncontrolled, was tearing the ship apart from the inside out. Ethan and Karos raced through the collapsing corridors, dodging falling debris and gouts of flame. They burst into the hangar bay just as the ship gave a final shuddering groan. Their strike craft was waiting, engines primed. They leaped aboard, slamming the hatches shut just as the bay doors blew out, venting the hangar into space. And then they were away, rocketing out of the dying ship, the flagship exploding behind them in a nova of light and fury. They shot out into the battle, into a scene of utter chaos. The Kaltok's fleet was in disarray, ships spinning out of control, firing on each other in confusion. The Allied forces pressed their advantage, tearing into the enemy ranks with renewed vigor. It was a rout, a slaughter. The Kaltoks, once so mighty and terrifying, were being swept aside like leaves before a hurricane. Their ships burned and broke apart, their warriors cut down in droves. And at the heart of it all, Ethan and Karos flew, leading the charge, rallying their forces. They had done the impossible. They had united two species, broken an ancient conspiracy, defeated a nightmare made flesh. The battle raged on, the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance, but for the first time in centuries there was hope. Hope for a future free from manipulation and deceit. Hope for a galaxy where human and Draconis could stand side by side as equals, as allies. A new chapter was being written, a new history forged, and Ethan and Karos were at the vanguard, leading the charge into a brighter tomorrow. The Kaltok's leader's eyes blazed with malicious glee as it unleashed a storm of psionic energy at Ethan and Karos. The human and Draconis warriors staggered, their minds assaulted by visions of terror and despair. They felt their very sanity fraying under the onslaught. But even as they teetered on the brink of madness, Ethan and Karos reached for each other, their hands clasping together. In that moment, something extraordinary happened. Their minds, their wills, their very essences merged, forming a bond stronger than any the galaxy had ever seen. A shimmering shield of psionic energy burst into existence around them, repelling the Kaltox leader's attacks. The creature recoiled, its eyes widening in disbelief. "Impossible," it hissed. "No mere primitives could withstand my power." Ethan and Karos rose to their feet, the shield pulsing around them. They could feel each other's thoughts, each other's strength flowing through their joined hands. The Kaltox leader's face contorted in rage. "It matters not. Soon your pathetic alliance will be nothing but ashes." It gestured to a pulsing mass of energy at the heart of the chamber. "Behold the psionic harvester. With the power stolen from 1,000 conquered worlds, I shall destroy entire star systems. Your homes, your peoples, will be erased from existence." Ethan and Karos exchanged a glance, horror and determination mingling in their shared psyche. They knew they had to stop this monstrosity, no matter the cost. As one, they charged the Kaltox leader. The creature met them with a flurry of psionic blasts and physical strikes. The chamber shook with the force of their battle, consoles shattering and bulkheads warping. Ethan and Karos fought as one being, their movements perfectly synchronized. When the leader lashed out at Ethan with a jagged claw, Karos was there to block it. When a wave of psionic energy threatened to crush Karos's mind, Ethan's will was there to bolster him. They pressed their attack, driving the Kaltox leader back. With each blow, they could feel its psionic defenses weakening. "Now!" Ethan roared, both aloud and in Karos's mind. Together, they unleashed a devastating psionic blast. It slammed into the Kaltox leader's chest, shattering its defenses and sending it flying across the chamber. The creature crashed into the psionic harvester, its body breaking apart on impact. A shockwave of energy exploded outward, ripping through the ship. Ethan and Karos were thrown off their feet, their psionic shield flickering and dying. Around them, the ship began to come apart. Explosions boomed in the distance, bulkheads crumpling like tin foil. The psionic harvester, unstable and overloading, pulsed with deadly light. Ethan hauled Karos to his feet. "We need to get out of here now." They raced through the disintegrating ship, dodging falling debris and gouts of flame. In their wake, the psionic harvester detonated, a sun-bright explosion consuming the Kaltox flagship from the inside out. Ethan and Karos burst into the hangar bay, leaping aboard a Kaltox fighter just as the deck collapsed behind them. The small craft rocketed out of the hangar, the shockwave from the exploding flagship throwing it end over end. Through the cockpit viewport, they saw the rest of the Kaltox fleet in chaos. Ships drifted aimlessly, weapons silent. The destruction of the flagship had shattered the quantum entanglement network, leaving the Kaltox in disarray. "All ships, attack!" Ethan broadcast on all frequencies. "The Kaltox are vulnerable, press the advantage." The human and Draconis fleet surged forward, weapons blazing. They tore into the Kaltox ships, explosions blossoming across the void. Fighter squadrons danced between the capital ships, plasma and missiles crisscrossing space. It was a maelstrom of destruction, a cataclysm the likes of which the galaxy had never seen. Human and Draconis ships took hits, some exploding into plumes of fire and shrapnel. But for every ship they lost, they destroyed 3 Kaltox vessels. The Allies fought with a ferocity and coordination that the Kaltox could not match, driven by the bonds of friendship and the knowledge of what was at stake. One by one, the Kaltox ships fell, torn apart by the relentless onslaught. And then, with a final world-shattering explosion, the last Kaltox dreadnought broke apart. Space was silent. The debris of shattered Kaltox ships drifted through the void, a graveyard of twisted metal and frozen corpses. On the bridge of the Allied flagship, Ethan and Karos stood side by side, watching the aftermath of their victory unfold on the view screens. "We did it," Ethan said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "We won." Karos nodded, his eyes distant. "But at what cost? So many lives lost on both sides." "That's why we have to make sure this never happens again," Ethan replied. "We have to build a new order, one based on cooperation and understanding." Over the next weeks, Ethan and Karos worked tirelessly to forge a new alliance between their peoples. They created a joint task force made up of the best human and Draconis warriors, charged with hunting down any remaining Kaltox loyalists and destroying their weapons and technology. But as they delved into the Kaltox's history, a disturbing truth came to light. Buried in the databanks of captured Kaltox ships, they found records that painted a very different picture of their enemy. "The Kaltox weren't always like this," Karos said, poring over the ancient files. "They were once a peaceful race, dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge and enlightenment." Ethan frowned at the holographic display. "What changed them?" "This," Karos said, pointing to a glowing symbol. "The psionic nexus, an artifact of immense power capable of amplifying psionic abilities to godlike levels." Ethan's eyes widened. That's how they were able to control their ships and weapons with such precision. They were linked together, their minds amplified by this thing. "And it drove them mad," Karos growled. "The power was too much for them to handle. It warped their minds, turned them into the monsters we fought." "We have to find it," Ethan said. "Destroy it before it can corrupt anyone else." They pored over the data, searching for clues to the Nexus's location. They found references to an ancient civilization, one that had fought the Kaltox eons ago and managed to hide the artifact away. "Here," Karos said, pointing to a star map. "The Araxian Expanse. The records say they built a fortress there to guard the Nexus." Ethan nodded. "Then that's where we're going." They assembled a team of their best warriors and set out into the uncharted reaches of the galaxy. They followed the star maps, navigating through treacherous asteroid fields and ionic storms. Their journey took them to long-dead worlds, where they fought off the savage descendants of the Kaltox's victims. They delved into derelict space stations, solving ancient riddles and evading deadly traps left by the Araxians. With each challenge, they learned more about the psionic nexus and the terrible toll it had taken on those who sought its power. They saw visions of entire civilizations consumed by madness, of worlds scoured clean of life. "We can't let that happen again," Ethan said, his jaw set with determination, no matter the cost. At last, they reached the Araxian fortress, a massive structure carved into the heart of a dead moon. As they approached, their sensors detected a Draconis ship already docked at the airlock. "Zorgax's loyalists," Karos hissed. "They're here for the Nexus." They boarded the fortress, weapons ready. The corridors were dark and twisted, echoing with the whispers of long-dead minds. They fought their way through the Draconis fanatics, their armor scorched by plasma fire. At the heart of the fortress, they found the leader of the cultists, a towering Draconis warrior, his scales etched with glowing psionic runes. In his claws, he held a pulsing orb of energy, the psionic nexus. "Fools!" he roared. "You cannot stop the ascension of the Kaltox. With this power, we will rebuild the Empire and conquer the galaxy." Ethan and Karos charged, their weapons blazing. The Draconis warrior met them with blasts of psionic energy that rent metal and shattered bone. They fought with everything they had, their minds linked by the bond they had forged in battle. But the Draconis was too strong, his power amplified by the Nexus. He battered them back, laughing as they struggled to stand. "Now you will witness true power," he snarled, raising the Nexus above his head. "Now you will—" A plasma bolt took him in the throat, burning through scales and flesh. The Draconis gurgled, the Nexus tumbling from his claws. Ethan lowered his smoking rifle, his face grim. Karos lunged, snatching the Nexus before it hit the ground. He could feel its power pulsing through him, whispering promises of godhood and conquest. For a moment he wavered. Then he met Ethan's eyes, saw the trust and understanding there. With a roar, Karos hurled the Nexus to the ground and brought his heel down on it with all his might. The orb shattered, releasing a blinding pulse of energy that knocked them flat. When the light faded, the Nexus was nothing more than shards of dull crystal. Ethan pulled Karos to his feet, clasping his arm. "It's over," he said. "We did it." Karos nodded, exhaustion etched into his face. "But the fight continues. There will always be those who seek power at any cost. Then we'll be there to stop them, Ethan said, together. They turned to leave, stepping over the fallen bodies of the Draconis cultists. The psionic nexus was gone, its terrible power destroyed forever. But the alliance between human and Draconis, forged in the heat of battle and tempered by shared sacrifice, would endure. A new era had begun, one of cooperation and understanding between the races of the galaxy. And Ethan and Kairos would be there to guide it, side by side as friends and brothers in arms. The ancient stone fortress loomed before them, a crumbling relic of a long-forgotten civilization. Ethan and Kairos stood side by side, their armor battered and scorched from the battles they had fought to reach this final confrontation. Behind them, a small contingent of human and Draconis warriors, united in their determination to end the Kaltox threat once and for all. Across the barren courtyard, the Draconis fanatics assembled, their eyes glowing with psionic energy. At their head stood their leader, a towering figure clad in ornate armor, the psionic nexus pulsing with malevolent power in his claws. "Surrender the artifact," Ethan shouted, his voice carrying across the empty expanse. "It's over. The Kaltox are gone. There's no need for more bloodshed." The fanatic leader sneered, his voice resonating with psionic force. "You understand nothing. The psionic nexus is our salvation. With its power, we will rebuild the Kaltox Empire and conquer the stars." Kairos stepped forward, his plasma blade humming to life. "The Kaltox were a plague. They brought only death and suffering. We won't let you repeat their mistakes." With a roar, the fanatics charged, psionic energy crackling around them. Ethan and Kairos leaped into battle, their own psionic abilities surging to meet the onslaught. The courtyard erupted into a maelstrom of clashing blades and exploding energy bolts. Ethan ducked under a psionic blast, his rifle spitting plasma. Beside him, Kairos deflected a flurry of strikes, his blade a blur of light. They fought in perfect sync, their bond allowing them to anticipate each other's moves and cover each other's blind spots. But the fanatics were relentless, driven by their twisted devotion to the psionic nexus. Even as they fell, cut down by plasma fire and psionic blasts, more surged forward, heedless of their own lives. At the center of the chaos, the fanatic leader bellowed in rage, the psionic nexus glowing brighter with each passing moment. Psionic shockwaves pulsed from the artifact, shattering stone and sending warriors flying. Ethan and Kairos fought their way through the horde, their armor cracked and sparking. They could feel the psionic nexus's power growing, threatening to engulf the entire battlefield. As they reached the fanatic leader, they unleashed the full might of their combined psionic abilities. Waves of telekinetic force clashed against the leader's shield, the air shimmering with the intensity of the struggle. But even with their strength combined, they could not break through. The psionic nexus was too strong, its power too vast. The leader laughed, madness glinting in his eyes. "You cannot win," he crowed. "The psionic nexus is invincible. It will consume you as it consumed the Kaltox before you." Kairos, his scales slick with blood, looked to Ethan. In that moment, a terrible realization dawned in his eyes. There was only one way to destroy the nexus, to end its threat forever. "Ethan," he said, his voice strained, "the nexus, it can only be destroyed from within. A psionic being must merge with it, overload it with their own energy." Ethan shook his head, understanding and horror dawning on his face. "No, Kairos, no, there has to be another way." But Kairos was already moving, his blade falling from his grasp. "You are the key, Ethan, the key to peace, to the future we fought for. My time is done." With a final anguished roar, Kairos leaped forward, psionic energy surging around him. He collided with the fanatic leader, grappling for the psionic nexus. The artifact pulsed wildly, its light growing blinding. Kairos locked eyes with Ethan one last time, a final farewell passing between them. Then, with a psionic surge that shook the very foundations of the fortress, he plunged his claws into the nexus. Light exploded outward, a cataclysmic eruption of psionic energy. Ethan was thrown back, his world dissolving into searing whiteness. He felt Karos's presence, a final flicker of warmth, and then nothing. When the light faded, Ethan pulled himself from the rubble, his armor shattered. The courtyard was a crater, the fanatics and their leader nothing more than ash. At the center, a scorched mark was all that remained of the psionic nexus. And of Karos. Ethan fell to his knees, grief and loss crashing over him. Karos, his friend, his brother, gone, sacrificed to save them all. Around him the surviving warriors gathered, human and draconis alike. They had won, but the cost had been higher than any of them could have imagined. Ethan stood, his eyes hard with resolve. Karos's sacrifice would not be in vain. The alliance they had forged, the peace they had fought for, it would endure. He would make sure of it. The galaxy had been given a second chance, a chance to heal and rebuild, and Ethan would spend the rest of his life ensuring that chance was not squandered. For Karos, for all those who had fallen, for the future they had dreamed of together. Ethan turned to his allies, his voice raw but strong. "Let's go home." The journey back to Earth was long, each parsec heavy with the weight of what had been lost. Ethan stood on the observation deck, staring out at the stars that Karos had loved so much. "I'll never forget you," he whispered. "Your sacrifice, your friendship. It will live on, I swear it." As the ship sailed on, carrying its weary heroes back to a galaxy forever changed, Ethan carried the memory of Karos in his heart. A memory of brotherhood, of courage, of the unbreakable bonds that had brought light to the darkest reaches of the universe. The war was over. The battle was won. But for Ethan, the true fight was just beginning. The fight to preserve the peace they had bought with blood and tears. A fight he would never surrender. For as long as he drew breath, Ethan would strive to build the galaxy that Karos had given his life to protect. A galaxy of unity, of hope, of endless possibility. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.